It's been 26 years since this car debuted and wowed car journalists, surprised car enthusiasts. Not only did this car challenge how vehicles were designed, but it marked a significant shift for the brand. This is the Mark I Audi TT.
Hi everybody, welcome to WhyBuy. This is my Audi TT VR6 DSG, a car that I've been chasing, or my original dream car, for 26 years. One day in 1996, I was in Greece with my wife, and we were walking through a little village or area of Glyfada. And we were coming back to our hotel that night, and we came across an Audi TT, the first time that I'd ever seen one. And at that moment, I fell in love with the car. The first car that I saw was a silver car, and it was kind of funny actually, because the way they park in Greece is there's no rules. So this car was actually in front of my hotel. Instead of being parked parallel, he was pulled straight up over the curb, so I couldn't miss it. We looked at the car and I thought, what the hell is this car? I've never seen anything like it before. The TT wasn't available in Canada at the moment when I saw it, but when it did come into the country and I saw it in a dealership, I really wanted to buy it. But the problem was I was young, I wasn't making a lot of money at that time, and this car was a little more expensive than your average car. So I kind of took the Audi TT and kind of put it in the back of my mind because, like I said, it was financially something more than I could afford at the time. But life went on as it does, right?
I think I just had a wake-up call. And it was disguised as a car. And it was screaming at me not to get too comfortable and fall asleep and miss my life.
The origins of the TT stem from a motorcycle race. Now, the Isle of Man TT, or Tourist Trophy in Britain, had two companies competing in it, DKW and NSU. Together, they developed a car to celebrate their success in the motorcycle race. But why does this even matter? Who cares? Well, those two companies merged with two other companies to form Audi, hence the four rings.
When I first came here, the bikes, I imagine, were not so powerful, or they didn't make as much noise as what they appear to do now.
Can give you a fright, you know.
DKW and NSU made a car that started a sort of philosophy when it comes to sports cars. Something that was attainable, something that was fun, easy to maintain, but most importantly, they kind of coined the term of tradition and technology. So after the Prinz TT and TTS, fast forward way ahead to the 1990s. Two guys who were working at VW were working on a project, Jay Mays and Freeman Thomas. This secret, new, revolutionary car that they were designing was named the TT. It's important to acknowledge the two main designers behind this car. Let's take Jay Mays for example. He started out his career working for Audi AG in Ingolstadt, but he was an American born in Oklahoma. He spent a little bit of time with BMW working on cars like the E34 5 Series and the 8 Series, but ultimately he came back to Audi. This is the same guy who helped design the 100 C4, he helped design the Mark III Golf, and he designed the Volkswagen Polo. Now let's talk about Freeman Thomas.
How do I look at design? Personally, I look at things, I want them to be honest, I want them to be functional, I want them to be timeless. I want something that is going to be endearing. That word endearing is something that is really important to me. It's something that I look at an object or a product or a vehicle and I think to myself, for some reason I love that.
Freeman Thomas was, again, an American who worked for a German car designer. But you have to first understand the genesis of his choice. He didn't start out working at VW or Audi. He started working at Porsche.
Certain things have a sense of authenticity and purity. I was very fortunate. Early on at Porsche, I was able to learn how to create shape and form with the best designers. I worked with the best engineers. You know, designing a car is a certain extent, it's character development, but the character development has to be an extension of a function. And I think that's a really great way to design a car.
So you have two car designers, both from different companies, but still under kind of the same school and train of thought. Now, coming together to design something revolutionary for the brand, how did it go? I mean, this was a time where essentially computers dominated car design, but they were about to change that. When the Audi TT was debuted in 1995, it blew everybody away. And what was more surprising is that this was a car that wasn't led by engineering first or technology. This was a car that was led first by design. And in fact, a design that was fiercely protected by Jay Mays and Freeman Thomas. You have to understand that the Audi TT started as a concept car that almost looks identical to the production model. This is really rare. When car designers announce vehicles and debut them, they seldom look like what the concept is when they're actually for sale. But the Audi TT is a great example of a car that was just kind of revolutionary. It was a shock. It was like, look at what we can do. But no, you could actually go and buy this car a few years later.
It wasn't until I had an accident and broke my back in a bicycle race. At first I thought, well, okay, I'm going to need something like a hatchback. I tried making the trucks and the lifted Jeeps work, but the fact was I could get myself into the vehicle, but trying to get my chair from way down there up over top of me into the vehicle was really tiring and hard to do. I went to Volkswagen initially, bought myself a Golf GTI because it was big, it had a hatch in the back, I could fit my chair, I could fit a lot of other equipment in the car if I needed to, and it was easy to, get in the car and get out of the car. The Audi TT, I first went and saw it at the dealership, and that was the Mark III. At that moment, I pretty much decided when I saw the hatch open and the amount of room, the space that was actually available in that car, it was something that right away I knew, okay, I wanted a TT forever. So I bought that Mark III TT and I did a lot with it, built it, played with it quite a bit. But in the back of my head, it wasn't filling the gap that I originally wanted, which was this car. So basically I spent the next 5 years looking for one. They came, they went, I kind of procrastinated a little bit about finding one and thinking, well, I'll find another one, a better one. And I kept looking for the better deal. And these cars were you know, they weren't on the market as much as they were at one point. So I let a couple go that I wished that I would have bought at that moment. So when I saw this car, the VR6 DSG, the exact car I was looking for, I jumped on it.
The Audi TT was groundbreaking. This was a car that you could finally buy, a sports car that was well-rounded, something that had safety, performance, luxury, practicality. It was really like nothing else at the time. I mean, its two biggest competitors at the time would probably be the Mazda MX-5 and the BMW Z4, Z3.
James Bond.
I wonder what he's getting instead.
C007's new BMW in GoldenEye.
Both those cars don't have rear seats, and they're a lot tighter than this car. This was kind of a novel concept, something that just didn't exist before. So what are the things that help the Audi TT stand out amongst the rest? Well, first and foremost, the front bumper area. First time you ever saw integrated bumpers into a car. Imagine being a car designer in the 90s or earlier. You design this beautiful shape. First time in your life you get an opportunity, and then federal regulators come in and say, oh, you need a bumper, and they slap this on. But in Europe, because this was sort of a new concept, a new design, the rear and the front shape of the car integrated the bumper so that you didn't need to have this. Now in some markets, you did. But this was really cool to see for the first time. The other thing that they made good use of was integrated headlights. Now this wasn't the first time you saw flush mounted headlights onto a car, but that combined with the bumpers, it just looked really sleek and proportionate. Similar to the front of the car, the rear bumpers on the Audi TT are flush with the body design. Now, this is something actually that sort of revolutionized car design. Not so much the bumpers, but these taillights. So federal governments require reflective strips to be mounted onto cars for safety reasons. But when you think about how heartbreaking that would be to a car designer to slap on these reflective strips, it just kind of kills your soul. But the designers of the TT thought of something really clever. What if we took the taillight and any area of the taillight that wasn't a light, we would make reflective? And regulators let it slide. And this is something that, if you look at modern cars today, is still being done. This was the first time you had ever seen something like this. And again, all of these things collectively build up to what is a car that seemed like not just something un-Audi-like, but something that was just so new in the car industry. Okay, so here's another really interesting part of the Audi TT. Now, cars back then, the way they were designed, typically just had fenders that had sort of a molded, integrated wheel arch. But the Audi TT had this really distinctive, bulging, larger-than-life fender flare. This was the first time we'd ever seen something like this where it was larger than it needed to be, but it stood out in such a good way, made the car look more aggressive. And if you look at modern cars today, whether it be cars, SUVs, this is something that's still copied in car design. So why is it that people say the Audi TT isn't a true sports car? Well, when you consider cars like the Porsche Boxster, a vehicle that from the ground up was intended to be built as a sports car, that's probably what they're referring to. The TT uses a modular chassis design, shared with the Golf, the Beetle. It's the VW A4 platform that, again, to help lower costs of production, they're designed to be shared across multiple different cars. And yes, it's not built from the ground up as a dedicated sports car, but it still drives really well. And when you consider modern cars today, this design philosophy is used across the board. This is how you can get into a car that's luxurious, sporty, has all these things, but the cost isn't outrageous. So how did the Audi TT drive? Well, originally, you could buy the car with the base 1.8 four-cylinder that was turbocharged. Now, this was a pretty good engine because paired with the small size of the car, it was sufficient power to enjoy. It was a front-wheel drive bias, but it was still all-wheel drive, able to send power to the rear wheels to keep it more stable. And even if you wanted to save additional costs, you could spec this car in front-wheel drive only. It wasn't until later in 2005 where enthusiasts were crying out for something that just had a little bit more, and that's the VR6, this V6 engine in this car. You had a huge bump in power, and the best part is that without turbocharging, forced induction, you get a better soundtrack, and the V6 sounded phenomenally good. That sounds so good.
My other cars are turbo cars, and it's a completely different sensation, feel. With a turbo car, you have a little bit of lag, slight lag, and then all of a sudden the boost kicks in and well, scares the crap out of some people. It did me the first time. The VR6, though, normally aspirated, it's a different beast entirely. You get your foot into it, a little more horsepower than the 1.8T, but it pulls and pulls and pulls. It doesn't have a lag, it doesn't have an end point until it reaches like 7,000 plus RPM, which is kind of unique and something that I'm really enjoying about this car. Another nice thing about the VR6 is reliability. Turbo engines, you know, you can, with just a little tune, you can crank a lot of horsepower through a turbo, which doesn't lead to, you know, the longest life of the engine, but they are pretty reliable. But the VR6, another thing that I like is it is very reliable. And this is where I wanted to have my car. I don't want to, you know, build it up to a quarter-mile monster. This car is for me only, so.
But back to the way the car drives. It's kind of unusual when you think of sports car. It's soft, supple, tight. It feels responsive but comfortable on long road trips. It really is a well-rounded car, no pun intended. I like it because it doesn't beat you up when you go for long trips. And it's still, if you want to throw it into a sport mode or if you have a manual, it's so light and easy to toss around. It's kind of the genesis of the everything sports car. So what's wrong with it? This right here is the problem. Well, not really. This is actually the solution to the problem. A lot of people think that because of the shape of the Audi TT, it was supremely aerodynamic. And yes, aerodynamics and a rounded shape do play a key part. But the issue wasn't this thing being efficient. The issue was high speeds. Now, when the original Audi TT Mark I was released, this was a flush design. You got to remember, the original designers, J. Mays and Freeman Thomas, wanted a perfectly symmetrical, rounded car that looked like something out of the future. But what they didn't account for is that because they sacrificed engineering and put design first, the Audi TT had a bad tendency to lift at high speeds. Now, in North America, this isn't so much of a problem because our speed limits are so low, but on the Autobahn, that's a problem. So it wasn't long after, to try and preserve the brand image of the car, Audi did a complete factory recall to bring in the Audi TTs, retrofit them with the spoiler, and stiffen up the suspension. Now keep in mind, this is voluntary, so not all of the original Mark I Audi TTs have a spoiler. Some people never took their cars into the dealers to get them fixed, and they actually command a higher price tag, so just don't take them up at high speeds on the Autobahn. If you look closely, the VR6 models, which came later, have this extension, this black piece on what was the original solution. So if you look at 1.8s or the base model TTs, when they added this spoiler, you would just see this part right here is much smaller.
So one of the main things that I was looking for with this car was the DSG transmission. In my Mark III, I had a DSG transmission as well. And it was a super fast shifting, just the way that it felt and moved, it was great. Now this one isn't that same gearbox that's in my Mark III, but it's the first iteration of the DSG. It's still, you know, rather fast. It's a little more, I guess you could call it a little clunky sometimes, but it's a transmission. You have to learn to drive the transmission more than driving the car. You always have to think about what you want the transmission to do before you ask it to do so.
The idea is that I'm in second gear now, but there's a second clutch which already has third gear spinning and ready to go. So when I pull this lever, bang, the change is completely instant. I must say, this is the only flappy paddle gearbox that works. But there is a price to pay.
It wasn't perfect, but there are lots of little things that I'm doing now, modifying it, trying to bring it back to OEM to start with. The original owner, or somewhere in the life of this car, somebody decided that they didn't like, or the old headlights weren't working for them. So they went and they replaced them with something hideous, in my opinion. This car was silver before. He told me upright that he hated silver cars. So he had this wrapped in this liquid copper. It's kind of a love-hate thing with me right now. One day I love the color, the next day I hate the color. And I'll probably go back to the silver color maybe in the next year or so. We'll see how the wrap holds up. I don't know how many kilometers are on it, maybe 1,000. And you can already see where a lot of the wrap is starting to come off on the bottom edges of the bumper, the sides of the car. The big things that I really love about this car, not only is it a fun, sporty car, it looks really good. I love the look of the car overall. And I love the way it drives. I love the way that I can put a bunch of stuff in the back of the car. I don't have to compromise and drive a sports car and then have my wife follow up with the luggage in the SUV. So we could put, in my Mark III TT, I could put my wheelchair, I could put a couple suitcases, and this car isn't much different. Although, the big difference between this car and that car, this car is a lot smaller. And it doesn't feel small when you're sitting in it. But when you're driving it and moving around, it's night and day difference between the two cars. They look the same, they are TTs, but the experience is completely different. I'd never really purchased older cars. And there's a lot of risk with that, right? There's that DSG is great and all, but if it breaks, it was hard enough to find the car, let alone finding DSG parts. It's the plan to pull this car apart and build it, rebuild it. It'll need it. The first thing I did with the car when I got it was automatically remove the back seats. I mean, they're back there. They're not realistic. Nobody can sit there for any amount of time. So they came out, and which just gave me even more room. So I pulled those out. I bought a kit from a company in the UK that fits in so it looks like a flat floor and lots of room. So you can see in the back of the car there's a lot more room than you would have in, say, a Porsche Boxster. So a lot like my Mark III TT, it has a lot of room in the back, which I kind of fell in love with. I had to do some modifications, of course. I can't reach that high as most people to bring the hatch down, but it's pretty simple to do with a little modification. A lot of the creature comforts, you know, are different. They're not as refined as they are today, but it adds to the experience of driving. Little things like that I found difficult and still as little difficult is I'm so used to backup cameras on my car. When I'm backing up, it feels like I'm taking forever. So one of the first things I did is added a rear camera to the car. Like I said, it's one of those things that we're so used to nowadays, it almost feels impossible to drive without. But it was an easy thing to add on. It basically just bolted to the license plate on the rear. You mount a little screen on the inside of the car, and when you're backing up, I positioned it here so it's kind of like the mirror. You're looking in that direction already anyways. And this window's kind of useless, so it's a good place for it. So when you're backing up and you're driving the car, you're looking just at it like you would a side mirror.
Now, the design of the Audi TT's interior is just as impressive as the exterior. Everything in here was designed in a way where it had a minimalist approach. There's no needless buttons or switches. Anything that was put into this cabinet feels like it was purpose made for the Audi TT. And this is kind of unusual because when you think about most big car companies, it's usually a parts bin where, you know, a lot of different brands will use the same components to lower the costs. But in the TT, however, everything in here feels like it was made for the Audi TT, which probably explains why it had such a long production lifespan. But besides the point, you'll see a lot of common themes in here, things that reflect other components, like the circular design with these dots. You'll see it on the air vents, you'll see it on the gear shifter, you'll see it on practically every single button or component. Door handles, the heated seat controls. Everything in here has this design. And I love the fact that this is a common theme carried out throughout the entire car, whether it's the instrument cluster, your tachometer, speedometer, this little circular pattern with the dots. I mean, even the cup holders have it on the aluminum bits. And, you know, I love the fact that it's functional too. The air vents, for example, there's no slider switch or little scroll wheel. You just turn them and it closes the air vents. That's really cool. The other thing I wanted to point out that sort of revolutionized car design, especially in 1995, when you think about how cars were designed back then, almost everything was black plastic or a chromed plastic. It looked cheap because it was. And what the TT did was integrate bare aluminum. It not only looks better, but it feels better too. And looking at modern luxury or sports cars today, take a gander. They still use bare aluminum following the trend of what this car set. Now, Jay Mays and Thomas Freeman may be credited for the exterior design of this car, which is beautiful, but they had a lot of help with the interior. Peter Schreier, Martin Smith, Romulus Rost created something in here that is just a wonderful space to be in. Take Rost, for example. When he was asked what inspired him to design the seats in this way, because it's got aggressive bolsterings, he said baseball. Why baseball? Well, he liked how the glove wrapped around the baseball. And when you think about the design of the seats holding your body in place, that's where that came from. And I haven't really been able to find this to confirm it, but you have to wonder, when Audi released the TT with a baseball-themed interior where you had stitching that resembled a baseball in brown leather, it was a total one-off. Maybe that's why they did it. So I'm 6 feet tall and I'm perfectly comfortable in here. In fact, it's amazing to me the appearance on the exterior, how small the car looks, but how much room there is inside. And what's nice about the Audi TT is the longer you spend in here, the more you can appreciate the attention to detail. For every little switch button, it all serves a purpose. There's no wasted energy in here. Take the nameplate, for example. You know, why do you have this aluminum TT nameplate? Well, it was meant to hide the stereo because there's all these needless buttons that would clutter up the dash. So yeah, make a nice retractable nameplate to cover it up. You don't need to have it, but it looks cool. And I completely understand the philosophy of trying to simplify the design aesthetic of the interior. This is a driver's car. This is something that is meant to just help you focus on the road and feel like a cockpit and feel cool. Like the windshield defrost up here, for example. They didn't need to design it this way. They could have just had slats in there that defrosted the windshield, but no, this is symmetrical and it lines up with the air vents on the interior of the car. It is really impressive how everything flows in a way that's beautiful and simple. It's a wonderful design, which is actually, to me, it's surprising to have so many designers on one product. You would think it would get convoluted and excessively clustered, but the opposite happened. Awesome. The Audi TT had a lifespan of 8 years, which is unusual when you think about modern cars today. Typically 4 or 5 years, they'll do a complete refresh. 8 years for the Mark I Audi TT. Could be because it was very popular. It could be because they invested so much money into the platform that didn't really share much with anything else. Now, yes, Jay Mays did go on to also design the new Beetle, pretty much in tandem with this car actually. But when you look at those cars side by side, a lot of the parts aren't shared. They just look a little bit similar. And I think the Audi TT is just sort of this one-off car that became extremely popular over the years because still I don't think there's anything quite like it. Even the Mark II and Mark III generations of the Audi TT got bigger, more power, and they became more serious performance cars. But the original Mark I was really just a kind of joyful, fun, small sports car. And it is still special.
So Mikhail did a really good job talking about the history and a lot of the features on the car. The one thing that he did miss though was this fuel filler cap. You go right back to it, like he was saying, this follows the same design concept with that circle and the little dots that go around it. If you look at it actually, you can see a little bit of where it comes from. If you look at any racing motorcycle, crotch rocket, if you look at the top of the tank, you basically see this exact type of filler, which is one of the main things that every TT has. What I find interesting about the TT, like I said, it's not like every other Audi out there. It's kind of its own thing. Right down from naming it after a motorcycle race, and it was kind of what led Audi going into the R8, which is something I'd love to have. R8 just isn't as convenient as this car, so this one's better in my opinion. So another thing I'll cover from my perspective that makes this car unique and perfect for my needs is the fact that it's a two-door car. My Mark III, you know, the door opens up the same way, but the Mark III pretty much stops about there, which is still adequate for me to get in and out of, but this car takes a little bit further. I don't know why it went so far, but getting in and out of the car with such a big door is rather easy to transfer in and out. It gives me lots of room to lift my chair and transfer it over to the passenger side. For braking, it's just pushing forward. For throttle, you just pull back, and you can do this while holding the steering wheel as well. Sounds like it's already warm. Right now it's got some temporary hand controls that I use for traveling, which are good, but I'll put in some dedicated hand controls, which are a lot more stable that I could say it's better than a broken hockey stick. So next you're going to ask, well, what does it cost to get into this car? I would say right now is the best time to look at buying them. If you're looking now, you can expect to pay for a base model about 6,000 Canadian, maybe a little less if it's only front wheel drive, but we don't see many front wheel drives in Canada. The 225 horsepower car, you're looking at once again around 8. And same with the VR6. The VR6 is around the same price. The most sought after one is that 225 turbo 1.8T though. And it's easy to make inexpensive power with that engine. And this one, if you want to make more power, you can add a turbo, but to do that, you're looking at probably $25,000 to $30,000. So I really like modifying my cars. It's kind of something that I do with everything. But this car specifically, I'm kind of taking it more to the OEM to bring it back to almost like the condition that it would have left the factory. Maybe a couple little different items in the car then from factory, but I'm really going to keep this one, I'll call it an OEM plus. Then I'll look at doing things like rebuilding the engine. It'll need it. The chains are an issue with these VR6s after every 100,000 kilometers. They say that you should do them. So I'll just build the engine properly with forged parts. And then from there, the next thing will be suspension. The car is really good now, but it is getting older. The suspension is going to need to be swapped out. Keeps the car, again, reliable. I can drive it all summer. I can drive in the wintertime. I can drive it wherever I want to go. It's kind of the nice thing about having the two cars. I eventually would like to get a Mark II, don't tell my wife, but the cars are total different animals. If I want to drive, go to the track and have a lot of horsepower that I can play with, the Mark III TT gives me that. If I want to just go out, drive down some backcountry roads or even a road trip, this car is fantastic for that. It pulls on the highway and it does pretty much everything that I really expect from a car. And I love it. For the price and the amount of car that you're getting, you just can't beat it at this point in time. And I think in the future, we'll see the prices start to go up considerably. Actually, you're seeing it already now. I've seen them for sale recently as high as, for a 2004 one in Calgary, was going for $34,000. It only had 25,000 kilometers on it. So the gems do pop up, but you're going to pay for them. But as far as reliability goes, the VR6 is the strongest platform. And trying to find one that you can see has never been modified is the way to go. But not a lot of them out there, so grab them while you can. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, show your support, and thank you for watching.
And the V6 sounded phenomenally good. Cut to run.
Found this video helpful, please like and subscribe and show your support. That's it.
Thanks for watching.
Please like and subscribe and support us. No, support us. Show your support. Yeah, it's not as bad as the opener, but
special. And now, over to Brian. I gotta find a way to segue. Oh, you got it?
Oh yeah, we're good to go now.
Okay. I had it in park.
you get one good shot and then the next 24 just keep getting worse.
So we're out filming the Mark I Audi TT, and for whatever reason, every time we film, there's a lawnmower in the distance. This is like some sort of horror movie where there's a lawnmower serial killer stalking us.
Yep.
I just can't get away from it. We drove out to the middle of nowhere. You know, I swear, when the camera isn't rolling, no one's around. There's not a peep. Even the birds are like, oh. But as soon as you hit record, it's just like fireworks, trucks, police, you name it. Everyone's coming out. Swallowed a bug. Oh.
Got the horse fly back?
I think I swallowed an osium or something.
Oh.
Ugh.
Nice.
And that's a wrap for filming on the Mark I Audi TT. Awesome.
Yeah, pretty much the day I sold my GTI.
Rabble.
I saw the car when I was in Greece in 1997.
I met you right as you were talking about how nice it would be to own a Mark 1.
Yep.
You think you're going to get a Mark 1, and then lo and behold.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I was searching, but at that time I was kind of just waiting for something to pop up instead of actually actively scouring the internet to find one.
What was supposed to just be like a, hey, let's get together, I'd love to feature you on WhyBuy and tell your story, kind of turned into a friendship. And this kind of brings me into my next point. When you work on a video, it's a lot of fun. Like a lot of fun. Just let me keep one car length ahead of you, sort of, kind of like a half car length. Perfect.